Hey everybody, Pastor Kyle here.
Pastor Tim.
Burr, 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 burr.
Coming at you in the morning.
So we're checking in a little bit late this week, but we had some questions though that we wanted to hit. And basically how this is operating is this is Tim and I just off the cuff, we're trying to give really important answers, which seems responsible.
Yeah, we're riffing.
So the question we got from Sunday is a follow-up, just context for what this video is, if you're watching this way afterward or not in connection with the sermon, was we talked about the reality of a God, and now we're going to be looking ahead to, okay, well, if there's evidence for a God, is there any evidence for like a specific God? That's kind of where we're going after this video. So one of the follow-ups in the mix of that, somebody had a question about other religions. Specifically, well, what about Jews? So if Jews are God's people, then are they excluded from salvation? Or say if somebody is like genuine in their pursuit of another religion, can't that be good? Because the question, of course, is can't all religions lead to God equally? And they're just kind of different forms of God revealing himself to mankind. So just kind of off the top of your head, Tim, like how does that statement or that idea strike you?
The reality is we've been studying Catalyst the past couple weeks, so a month or so, major world religions. We've done Hinduism and Islam, Buddhism. This week we were in Judaism, which is ironic.
Right.
With that, there's a lot of, like, each one demands their own structure. When they look at whatever their divine is, there's always that mentality of, like, this is mutually exclusive.
Okay.
This exists alone. And so when we're thinking about like multiple pathways to if there's one united universal divine, well, that doesn't really work when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. And when Islam is saying, actually, most of the Old Testament's a little bit untrustworthy, and then definitely Jesus is untrustworthy. Yeah. It just comes countered. Or if Judaism, they don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, that totally counters what
Jesus said he was. Yeah.
And so it doesn't really line up that we can't have multiple pathways. None of the world religions would get along. Okay.
Well, what do you think is the dividing line? What do you think is like really the lightning rod thing that says, okay, this is why they can't be the same? Is it just because of like general disagreements, or do you think that Jesus is the one that really is that lightning rod that says...
That's the truth of it all.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus did it, and when he came, he made sense of it all.
Yeah.
All of the Old Testament points towards a Messiah. Even the Jews who reject the New Testament,
right,
in the Hebrew Bible, they anticipate a Messiah. And Jesus fulfilled that. I mean, you look at, there was that study done about the statistician. He took all his students and they took what are some of the most verifiable, some of the most readily verifiable prophecies that were fulfilled in the Old Testament through Jesus. And the number they came up with is astronomical. They said the odds of any person ever fulfilling those prophecies would be like taking the state of Texas, filling it full of a foot full of like quarters, taking one and painting it white, throwing it in, and a blind person going in and picking that one out. It's impossible. It's not possible.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. So the size of Texas, foot deep with quarters.
Yep.
A blind person
digging through,
finding one.
You find the one.
And all that. Okay. So there is a sense that, to kind of like take a shift, there is a sense that it's grounded in reality. Right? So that it's not just stories, it's not just like private revelation, it's something that we can actually verifiably see in history. And the effect for me, a big one for me is the effect it had, like the book of Acts is history. Yeah. You know, the fact that Christianity exploded the way it did was supernatural. It was people like genuinely living out their new faith in Jesus, but totally ignorant though, right? Yeah. I mean, they didn't know anything at all. It wasn't like they had... raw. Yeah, like not everybody had a Bible in their house because not everybody could read or write. And so there was no scripture available for these early Christians. And yet something was supernaturally happening, which I think is cool to consider too. Something else that... What would be a good analogy? So I'm asking this totally off the cuff here.
You are.
What would be a good analogy, do you think, that you could be like, so this is like just believing and having faith in something, because that's what people will say. As long as you believe in something and it's not hurting other people, then that works. That's good for you. Is there like a good analogy we could give people to kind of think more clearly and more honestly and more truthfully about that idea?
I don't know if I necessarily have a clear analogy, but I mean, fundamentally what you're saying is... do we get to tell God who he is, or should we be asking God who he is?
Okay.
Because honestly, when we're saying, well, all religions are fine, What we're saying is, I feel like that should be okay.
Okay.
And I don't know that that's satisfactory.
Okay. I remember, I don't remember who it was, but somebody much smarter than me, they gave the analogy that it's like catching a flight somewhere. So I may want to go to California, but if I catch a flight to Europe, then that is going in the wrong direction completely. Yeah. Now, I may have all the best intentions in the world. I may really, really, really think that I'm going to Europe or California, depending on which way I think I'm going. But if I'm headed in the opposite direction, it doesn't really matter because theologically, logically, truthfully, factually, I'm wrong. I'm going in the wrong direction. No matter how strongly I believe, that doesn't make it right. And I do think, and what's your thoughts on like just kind of culturally our temperature where we are now, that basically people think that if they believe it, then it must be true in general?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a cultural assumption, and it really is rooted in feelings.
Okay. Why do you think that's dangerous, something being rooted in feelings? Because God gave us feelings,
subjective.
Right?
Yeah, it's subjective.
Okay.
Because I can feel something and you can feel something, and if we're feeling differently about the same thing, which one of our truths becomes true?
Okay.
That subjectivity is dangerous because then we allow common sense to go take a back seat while whatever we feel now takes the driver's seat.
Okay. Okay. So what about those people then? So this is the harder question. This is like the deeper kind of sticky, uncomfortable question. Yeah. So what about people of other faiths and other religions? So you grow up in a country, you grow up in a world where you don't hear about Jesus. Are those people without hope?
I don't think so at all. I mean, I think if the reality is in Romans, he says, Romans 1:20, it says that his divine power, and it can all be seen through nature.
Okay.
I mean, there's a revelation that goes beyond. Now, okay. It doesn't mean that if you look at a tree, you're like, oh, Jesus, got it.
Okay.
But there are pieces of like reality that understanding that God does exist is totally in Scripture.
Okay. But do you think that is worthy of salvation? Because it does say that we are left without excuse because his divine nature and who he is has been revealed through what he has made. So we don't have an excuse. So how would you like help somebody think through that then? Okay, so there's somebody up there, right? That somebody did all this, I think is step one. But like, what about with Jesus? So I grew up, I'm a Buddhist, I live in the middle of nowhere, China, or maybe I'm like, ancestor worship, and maybe it's not even Buddha. I just live in the middle of China, never had access to Jesus. What about that person? But they faithfully follow, the ancestor worship, they faithfully follow the religion handed down to them, and then they die.
I mean, it's not the same, is it? They're not following after Jesus.
But do they have any chance? Is there any hope for them? Because I think that there is. Because I think if you go to the Bible itself, I think it helps us wrestle with these questions. Can God reveal himself to people without somebody coming? Because Romans 10 would say, how are they going to hear if we don't go and tell them, right? So there's that responsibility of I need to go and tell them. But also, though, like just this morning, I was thinking through the story of Joseph in Genesis. Like, how did God reveal himself to Joseph? How did God reveal himself eventually, to different, the patriarchs, right? The point of getting to Joseph, he had already made himself known to Abraham, right? Abraham didn't know him and was a total pagan, like nothing to do with Yahweh God. And yet God stepped into his story, revealed himself to Abraham. Abraham follows the call. The patriarchs, they all had these like individual callings. And I think all the way down, even into the New Testament, because who's the first people to get visions from God in the New Testament, right? I mean, the parents of Jesus. Yeah. So you've got Mary and you've got Joseph. And I think that the Bible helps us answer those kinds of difficult, I can't really answer kind of questions. Like, what about the Buddhists in the middle of nowhere? Who knows? Are they going to ever hear about Jesus? Well, I think that's why we're without excuse. What do you think about that? Like because Jesus can reveal himself to everybody.
I mean, truthfully, I'm not about to put God in a box.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell him what he can't do.
Right.
And so if he can reach out to someone anywhere, I mean, absolutely, why can't he?
Right. Okay, so then the question is, so what if somebody faithfully follows another religion, has the opportunity maybe to accept that mercy from Christ because there's maybe some kind of supernatural intervention there? What if they still choose no? What then?
I mean, I think you've already said it. We're all without excuse.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity and you chose not to, weren't you given the chance?
Yeah. And that's, I think, legit a hard pill to swallow.
It is.
Like, the exclusivity of Jesus is one of the harder things to really be able to stomach. And then I think in modern sensibility, we're just like, well, that's not fair. That's narrow-minded. But to that argument, which I think is valid, how would you kind of discuss or debate or argue against that? Well, that's not fair. That's too narrow-minded. Like, is there any like good justification for Jesus being the only way, or a good way to explain that?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, we can even contextualize it into our lives now. Like, in America, we have all this access to Christ, and yet no one is choosing it. Like, everyone, culturally wide, will reject the truths of Christ.
Okay.
And so, by the same very measure, we're without excuse. When we're thinking, what would be a good justification? I mean, like, Jesus came and died on the cross. He paid the price for sin. There was something very specific. There wasn't a hope that all people would be religious. There was sin entered the world and ruined the world. Mm-hmm. It needed to be saved, and Jesus saved it.
Okay.
And so for exclusivity's sake, when we look towards Buddhism or we look towards Hinduism, those aren't remedying the actual issues that are on with the world with sin.
Okay.
They're a different approach, tackling a different problem that isn't rooted in the same reality that we're living in.
Okay. More works-based.
Yeah.
Right.
And anything like that is going to come shy. Because every step of the path, it was grace. It was always grace.
Yeah.
You look at, because one of the original questions was about Judaism. I mean, there was a quote by a rabbi who says it's by works and deeds and not by faith that we're saved.
Yep.
Which to me blows my mind when you look at Abraham or you look at any of the patriarchs. You look at Noah, and it was always grace.
Yeah.
When the flood came to Noah, he said the entire world was wicked.
Right.
And yet, through one man, God shows grace.
Yep.
And that's extremely different.
Yeah.
There's no other religion like it, and it's not personal for others.
Yeah, and like you said, to pick up on something you said earlier, I think that there is a very real sense that like when you look at reality, like what matches best with reality in the world that we live in, right? And that's what I love about the biblical story, because it is so honest, it is so raw, it's so awkward at times, but you see the problem of sin and the answer of Buddhism, or, the problems that you see in the world.
The answer's in yourself.
Right, or the very idea that like there is no, I need to just stop desiring.
Yeah.
Like that's not reality. That's not going to really, there's no way to stop doing that. And so there has to be something that, or that there is no suffering, or that there is no happiness. These ideas in Buddhism, like, well, that's not grounded in reality and what we experience.
It doesn't remedy the world.
And it doesn't.
At your very best, you've saved yourself.
Right. And so making myself God is not going to be the best answer. It's not going to be what I need. And I think that a lot of things that we turn to, whether it's other religions or whether it's just trying to be a good person, because in a way that can almost be a religion. Yeah. Like, I just want to be a good person and then everything will work out. And it's like, okay, but who defines what good is? Yeah. Like, then you start getting into more tricky questions like that. So the idea of getting to heaven, about like what happens after this life, is still a very scary question for a lot of people, because they feel very unsure about that. And it's, again, well, if I just follow something that works for me, or if I'm just a good person. But I think I had said last Sunday, like, Christianity can't work for us. It can't work for you just because it works for us. It has to work because it's right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like taking a medication. Like, I can't just take something because, well, I guess
I'll take this pill.
Yeah, I'll just take this because, I hope it works for me. Like, either it works for you or it doesn't. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, that kind of issue, I think, is really where I see the exclusivity of Jesus as being like you said, the one answer to the one problem, to the root problem, and then everything pointing to Jesus, and that narrative that arcs over like all of human history, pointing to Jesus, to the point where, like you said, a foot deep, the size of Texas,
possible.
Right? One coin. So it's like, that idea that God would paint a picture that is that overarching and that improbable, and then Jesus making the claims that he did. I think that we just need to have a little bit more curiosity about that, even if you're like a person of no faith or another faith, to say, like, what are the odds of all that happening? And then, like, why do we need that? And what are the problems I see around me? And even like our comfort level, we chase that as if it's a religion as well, right? Goodness and comfort. And it's like, well, our goodness and comfort making us happy. I would argue in America, we're very comfortable. We got it pretty good, and we're pretty miserable. So why is that? And so again, like, going back to the teachings of Jesus, going back to that deeper need, like, well, what do we need? Well, there's a salvation issue. There's a brokenness there that we see, Genesis 3, right? Yeah. Immediately. So how about somebody that might have a worry about, like, well, because I've had this question too, and it's kind of similar to what about other religions? What about like different denominations within Christianity? What about somebody that's a Catholic or somebody that's Lutheran or somebody that's a Baptist? Like how do we know? Like, there's so many different versions, quote unquote, of Christianity. Like, how do we know?
I think you got to take the real perspective. When we look at other denominations, you would sure hope that at the end of the day, every single person is doing their best to honor God with their denomination.
Okay.
What they're doing, they believe is what's best.
Yeah.
Now,
you would hope.
You would hope. It's not always true, but with Jesus, it's honestly very simple. Like, he wants to have a relationship with us. He entered into this world with the purpose of having a relationship with us. While we may not fully always agree with the brothers and sisters who are doing it differently, they still follow the same Jesus.
Okay.
They still love the same Jesus.
So what's the core message, do you think? So somebody's watching or somebody's listening today, like, what do we actually need to know about Jesus? What would you say?
I look at the gospel. We started with the problem.
Yeah.
Sin was in the world.
Right.
Jesus came as a solution, and when he died and rose again, he went and he beat hell, he beat sin, he beat death. He came back with the keys for freedom.
Okay.
And he came as the new king. And so when we look at the gospel, it's a gospel of kingdom proclamation, that Jesus has done something so amazing.
Yeah.
That really this transforms lives.
Okay.
And it's available to everyone.
Okay.
So when we're looking at the basics.
But so let me jump in though. So for the person that's listening or watching and they're saying okay, but why did he need to die? Because this can be confusing for a lot of people. Yeah. Okay, so if I want to go to heaven, what does that have to do with Jesus dying on a cross? Why does my sin, so say I've sinned. Maybe I agree. I can see that there's a moral law and that, we do all sin. We all do things that are wrong. Okay, maybe I'll give you that. But why does Jesus dying have anything to do with that? Or how?
You look at the Jewish Old Testament. I mean, it started with blood for blood. Like, when you commit a sin, there's a cost to that.
Okay.
There's a very real cost for that.
Okay.
And so there was a sacrificial system that was in place.
Okay.
Now, with Jesus, that sacrificial system has been fulfilled. We don't have to continue sacrificing because he was the one for all. There was a very true problem that needed a very true solution.
Okay.
But that massive size of sin could only be remedied by something so divine and godlike.
Okay.
Could have been the only solution.
So sin is costly.
Yeah, big cost.
Right? And it costs life. In order to pay for sin, a life is going to be required, right? I mean, that's the whole Old Testament system.
The whole Old Testament system.
So pointing to Jesus and Jesus saying the final perfect sacrifice is going to be mine. The only way you can be right with a perfect and holy God is to be perfect and holy yourself.
That's right.
But you can't do that on your own.
It's not possible.
But with Jesus, that's what he did. So I say, for me, that is a linchpin of our faith, of saying the reality of the crucifixion is why you see the book of Acts happening. It's why even just this morning listening to another podcast, and they were talking about how there are atheist philosophers that understand that the world we live in today, and the world most of us take for granted as far as what is right and wrong, the reason we have that is because of Christianity.
Yeah.
So even atheist philosophers and sociologists will look at what Jesus Christ did, this homeless, itinerant, wandering preacher, what he did and the movement he started. It literally gave us the world that we have today, in the West especially, but really globally, the human rights, right? The value of people, all that stuff, because without a God, there are no human rights. Right? I mean, we're all no different than the plants and animals outside, but what Jesus Christ gave us was unique, and I think that's the miracle of the book of Acts. So if you're watching this today and you're wondering what's the deal's all about, book of John, great place to start, but then also the book of Acts. So here's Jesus proclaiming this message of the kingdom coming and salvation and him being God and everything, God among us. And then the book of Acts. Why would the book of Acts happen? Because again, it's not just in the Bible, it's a historical fact that the book of Acts went down and Christianity exploded. How did that happen? There's something there I think that's worth considering.
I mean, the rate of growth is impossible. The fact that they grew to the size they did in 100 years.
Right.
Hasn't happened since.
Right.
Won't happen again.
Right. Became a threat to the entire Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to be said there. So there's a difficult truth. To get back to our question, there is a very, very difficult truth of, okay, like, well, why are all these religions out there? Like, why can't they all lead to God? But I think that, like Ecclesiastes 3 says, that God put eternity in our hearts. So I think there is something in us that yearns for something else, that yearns for more, that realizes that this world is not it. And that's the unsettling nature of just being in this world, and the unsatisfying nature of the lives that we live sometimes. And then you look at, well, why so many religions? Again, because we're reaching out for that. And so when God says, but I've revealed myself, and it's not just some Western religion, it's a Middle Eastern religion that he revealed himself through. And so I think that that's, again, hard truth, but at the end of the day, if there's a specific problem, God said, I'm going to specifically have a solution for that specific problem in Jesus Christ. And so, yes, that's a difficult truth. And if you're watching as a believer, non-believer, a skeptic, it's like, yeah, that is the narrow focus of God's plan of salvation for mankind, is not to just give us a bunch of confusing, contradictory answers and solutions, but to give us one very specific answer to a very specific problem.
Yep. That's right. Anything
else?
I think we got this.
Man.
It was such an easy question.
It was very easy.
We were able to approach it simply.
We should talk about the Nephilim next time.
Oh, man. You'll have to wait on that one.
Yeah, Tim's going to preach on that. So you're going to want to hear that.
Give it a few weeks.
It's going to be life-changing. All right, well, everybody, thank you for checking in today, whether you're watching or whether you're listening. As we always say, if you like this today, if it was helpful for you, we ask you just to like it, share it, do whatever, because we do want to help people in very practical ways understand who Jesus is. We want to wrestle with difficult questions that people are clearly asking. We most of the time on these, we're just answering questions that people have and trying to do it in simple ways. So again, it helps us out if you like it, share it, give us feedback, comment, let us know what you think. But that's it for today, and we'll see you next time.